the undisputed GOAT of chess, Magnus Carlsen, 5-time world champion. He retired because no one could beat him, but even the greatest fall. These are some moments he got destroyed by others. Sometimes it's youngsters, sometimes it's total strangers, like the time he got crushed by a guy at a bar, or the woman who smoked him on the street. But first, let's start with the most intense battle of all, Magnus versus the reigning world champion. Gukesh Demoraju. Magnus had already taken down Gukesh earlier in this tournament, and today he's back to prove it wasn't a fluke. Gukesh, on the other hand, is out for redemption. He begins confidently with e4, and Magnus responds with e5. Gukesh goes for the Ruy Lopez, preparing for a complex battle, likely expecting Magnus to expand on the queen side, but instead, Magnus develops with knight f6, steering the game toward a tense, strategic middle game. This subtle shift sets the tone. Magnus is looking to drag this into an endgame, his home turf, and Gukesh knows it. He defends the center pawn to prevent Carlsen's knight from causing early damage, and for the next several moves, both players circle carefully, repositioning and measuring each other's intent. The first real provocation comes when Gukesh offers a bishop trade. Magnus declines the direct exchange and instead reroutes his other bishop, adding a layer of pressure. Gukesh expands with b3 to give his bishop space, and Magnus takes the opportunity to trade bishops and activate his knight. Slowly, the pressure begins to mount on Gukesh's central pawn, and despite his best efforts, he starts slipping into a passive position. He tries to reroute his bishop to the queen side, but it is not putting any pressure to the king side. Carlsen begins to march forward, turning the screws, boxing in Gukesh's king, and limiting every escape route. Gukesh looks for counterplay with a misplaced queen move, attacking a pawn but exposing himself to a sharp response. Magnus seizes the opportunity instantly with bishop d3, targeting the weakened pawn structure. The threat is only possible because of that queen side step. The bishop is protected, the attack is live, and Gukesh finds himself forced to defend with his knight. But Magnus isn't done. He continues advancing his pawns, squeezing every square and leaving Gukesh with no good options. And so Gukesh continues down the wrong path, not because he wants to, but because there's nothing else left. Magnus pushes again, attacking the knight with a pawn, and now Gukesh has to move it. Gukesh lashes out with rook to a4, striking at Carlsen's rook in search of some breathing room. Magnus calmly reinforces it with his second rook. The pressure remains. Gukesh is simply trying to survive. He plays rook a7, a move he would later say he made just to hang on a little longer because despite the hopelessness of the position, he wasn't ready to leave the board, not against Magnus. Then Carlsen makes the breakthrough. He sacrifices his knight with knight e2, pinning Gukesh's knight to the king. It looks like a killer shot until it isn't. Gukesh calmly moves his king, dodging the threat, and moments later, Magnus tries to bring his king forward to finish the assault. But this is the turning point. Gukesh sees it instantly. He cuts off the king's escape route, pushing it all the way to the back rank with a flurry of precise moves. Then, in a moment of pure brilliance, he plays knight d7, forking a rook and a pawn, flipping the board in his favor. Both clocks are nearly out. Seconds remain, and that's when Magnus cracks. Desperate to salvage something, he plays knight e2, a check that sacrifices the rook, hoping that after the knight is taken, he'll have just enough time to promote a pawn. But it's a miscalculation. That same night, Gukesh's knight shuts down both pawns. The promotion is denied, the board is collapsing. Magnus stares at the pieces, realizes it's over, slams the table and resigns. But that's not the first time he lost his mind. In this game against Boris Savchenko, Magnus Carlsen would go from complete control to total collapse, all in just a few moves. It starts like any high-level matchup. Magnus opens with pawn to e4, Boris responds with c5, and the game slides into a standard Sicilian defense. Both sides play precisely, with white setting up c4 and d4 while black anchors with c6 and f6. Magnus quietly develops his bishop to e2, castles, and so does Boris. At this point, the board is balanced, completely equal. But Magnus wants more. He tries to tilt the scales by developing his bishop to e3, signaling an attack plan involving f4. Boris doesn't blink. He places his queen on a5, connecting the rooks and preparing for counterplay. Magnus swings his rook to the side, Boris mirrors. Neither player realizes they're approaching a tactical disaster. Magnus initiates an attack with a pawn thrust, forcing Boris to retreat his knight. But then it happens. Magnus makes a catastrophic decision. He plays knight to d5, exposing a loose pawn on a2. Boris doesn't hesitate. He captures it with his queen. Magnus tries to recover by pushing another pawn, setting up what looks like a trap. A few exchanges later, Boris makes an error of his own with knight to f6. Magnus seizes the chance with knight to c3, setting up a future pawn push to b5, which traps Boris's knight. Realizing the threat, Boris preemptively sacrifices the piece. Now Magnus is up material and starts tightening the noose. After trading bishops, he offers a queen exchange. Boris knows this is dangerous. Nobody wants to play a simplified endgame against Magnus, but he's forced to comply. The queens come off the board, Magnus plants his bishop on b6, and suddenly Boris is the one chasing ghosts. He pushes his pawn to f5, but Magnus calmly centralizes his king and orchestrates trades that only strengthen his position. After a quiet h3 push and rook lift, Magnus prepares to double up. Boris, sensing danger, throws in a rook move to b3 that looks suicidal. But it's bait. If Magnus captures, Boris gets a passed pawn that could become a queen. Magnus senses the trap and shifts his rook to d1, but that lets Boris scoop up a free pawn. The material is close to equal again, and Magnus offers another bishop trade. Boris declines and attacks the knight instead. Magnus retreats his bishop, Boris lashes out, and the game turns into a nerve-wracking standoff. The clock ticks down, pressure mounts, Magnus checks the king, forces a rook trade, and a few more moves bring Boris to a critical pawn push, c3 just 2 steps from queening. Magnus blocks it, Boris reinforces with his bishop, and we enter the final phase. Magnus grabs the pawn, they trade bishop for rook, and now it's a complex endgame. Magnus has a rook and 2 pawns, Boris has a bishop and 4 pawns, including a dangerous passer. The game should end in a draw unless someone blunders. They shuffle their pieces in search of a break, and then it happens. Magnus brings his king to d3, trying to protect his remaining pawns, but unknowingly steps into a trap. Magnus instantly realizes the blunder and tries to adjust his move, moving the king again to a safe square, but it's too late. He already lifted his hand. It's an illegal move. Boris points it out. Magnus freezes, scrunches up his face in frustration, then silently stops the clock, but at least he lost to someone who's older than him. Unlike in this game, Vincent Kiemer, the 18-year-old German prodigy, was about to face the ultimate test, Magnus Carlsen. Vincent opens with pawn to d4, and Magnus replies with knight to f6. A few moves later, Magnus strikes the center, and Vincent chooses the exchange variation, leading to what's known as the Carlsbad pawn structure. Vincent immediately tries to pin Magnus's knight to the king, aiming to win a pawn after the queen recaptures. But Magnus shuts this plan down instantly by pinning Vincent's knight right back. Both players trade ideas and slowly develop their pieces, and after some careful maneuvering, they both castle into safety. Now the battle truly begins. Vincent launches an attack on the queen side, the correct plan for white in this structure, while Magnus, calm and collected, patiently studies every single possibility. When Vincent's knight attacks Magnus's queen, Magnus strikes back, taking a bishop with check, and tucks his queen to safety. The position remains completely equal, but the tension is building. A few moves later, the queen side blows open. Magnus pushes his knight forward, looking for deadly tactics, but Vincent senses the danger and quickly trades it off. After a series of trades, Magnus secures a passed pawn, exactly the kind of endgame advantage Magnus thrives on. All he needs to do is simplify and grind it down like he always does, but then disaster strikes. Magnus plays knight to c2, a massive blunder. Suddenly, Vincent has a direct path to attack Magnus's king. Magnus doesn't even realize it at first, but Vincent does. Vincent slams down knight to d6, threatening everything. Magnus tries to reposition his rook, pauses, calculates, and at that moment he knows he's in trouble. Magnus drags the game out, desperately hoping Vincent slips up, but the teenager remains ice cold, taking his time, finding the best moves one after another, until Magnus has no choice. He resigns. The prodigy has beaten the world champion, but that was nothing compared to this, because in this game, a random online player, LP Soupy, will completely destroy Magnus with one of the most shocking queen sacrifices you'll ever see.
Wow, that is awesome. Really awesome.
The game begins with LP playing e4 and Magnus replies with e5. After a few developing moves, Magnus pins LP's knight to the queen, but LP instantly unpins and strikes back, attacking Magnus's queen and forcing it to retreat. Magnus trades his bishop for the knight, both players castle, and the tension starts to rise. Magnus throws his knight to d4, putting pressure on LP's pieces, but LP isn't scared. He starts pushing pawns on the king side, dragging his knight forward and building up a deadly attack. Magnus senses the danger and trades his knight for LP's bishop, but this does nothing to slow him down. And then out of nowhere, he sacrifices his knight. Magnus ignores the sacrifice, calmly pushing a pawn, thinking the attack won't work, but LP sacrifices another pawn, tearing open the diagonal for his bishop. Magnus, clearly impressed, even says out loud, "This guy is really creative." Magnus takes the free pawn, But LP isn't finished. He slides his bishop into the attack and sacrifices his knight again. Magnus hesitates. He knows his king is getting surrounded. But finally, with a smirk, he takes the knight and mutters, "Whatever." He thinks LP's plan isn't gonna work, but LP is ready to prove that it was a terrible mistake Magnus shouldn't have made against him. Magnus brings his bishop back to defend his king, but LP calmly lifts his rook one square, setting up a devastating battery. Magnus spots the danger too late, frantically moving his king to safety. But there is no safety, because in this exact position, LP Soupy plays one of the coldest moves in chess history, a stunning queen sacrifice.
Ooh. That is dirty. Wow. 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 That is awesome. Really awesome. Really awesome. There's nothing I can do, right? It's just mate. Wow. Okay, I resign.
His king is trapped. The move rook to a8 checkmate is unstoppable. A random online player just humiliated the world champion with a queen sacrifice that will be remembered forever. And that's how even the greatest chess player alive, Magnus Carlsen, has been crushed in ways nobody saw coming. Which one of these losses shocked you the most? If you want to see more insane chess content, check out this video right here, because trust me, the last clip in that one is even crazier than the queen sacrifice you just saw.